And perhaps kept her, was house sitting. Well,
Good morning and welcome. Looking forward very much this morning to a presentation that I think will be a benefit to all of us. And as soon as the noise in the auditorium quiets down, every right to continue the conversation, of course. It's my privilege today to introduce our speaker for the Adult Forum today, Will Willimon. Known among us as former Dean of the Chapel for 20 years, former Bishop in the United Methodist Church, and of course very connected with the Divinity School here. And one of the recent books that Will has written is a book on aging, which I have enjoyed very much and put into practice in my ministry and pastoral care already. And as we talked about that, we thought it would be a good thing to have this experience as an adult forum. And also to encourage us as a congregation to participate in the book study that's going on right now of Will's book on aging. And that's Wednesdays mornings and evening, I should say, and you're welcome to join in on that now as well. One of the things that struck me in reading Will's book on aging is that among the many roles that he plays in the church, one is a pastoral role. And this is a very pastoral topic, I believe, and we're going to hear more about this morning. Look forward to it very much, Will. Thanks for being here.
Again, glad to be with you, and thank you for those of you who got the book. And I'm honored that you read the book. What I like to do is speak to audiences where I think I know more than they do about the subject. So I love like New Testament eschatology, because I can count on, there being nobody in the room except maybe Chris that knows anything about that subject. And I like that. Well, here's a subject which there are people in the room know all about it than I. And generally, we're all living out this subject right now. Aging is a process that begins at birth, and it continues throughout our lives. It accelerates after midlife. Woody Allen had his quote is saying, "Well, it's kind of a joke to come to my 50th birthday and realize that nearly half of my life is over." Which shows the nature of aging is that by its nature, aging is an area that a lot of people in our culture, including me, have trouble confronting and maybe telling the truth about. And in the book, I talk about these ads for these retirement communities where they'll show people on bicycles or swimming or bungee jumping. And we all smile because we think that's really not the truth. I was recently in a retirement community visiting someone who is coming to the end of his life. And I went past the bar, the exercise room, and the pool to get to him. They were all empty. And I thought, wow. In a way, therefore, when it comes to the topic of aging, I think one of our challenges is to be truthful, to be honest about it. And at the same time, while telling the truth about aging, to speak about aging truthfully as a gift that, in a sense, we're among the first generation to enjoy. I know my wife Patsy, who's sick this morning and couldn't be here, but member of the congregation, but she noted her grandfather and grandmother were Methodist preachers in South Carolina. Both of them planned to retire, if they lived to retirement, in poverty. And the practice in their family was always you retire and then you go to live in a room with your children. hoping they have a house big enough to accommodate you. That was called retirement. And we're kind of the first generation in North America, many of us, to have a surplus to be able to retire in the fashion we're retiring. Also, but to note that the discrepancies between rich and poor in America are much more marked in retirement. That like 40% of Americans retire with very little retirement money to retire well, and that some have said that the ways we're thinking of retirement, as you go to this nice retirement community with all kinds of facilities and all, that really is a privilege enjoyed by a minority of Americans and may be unsustainable into the future. I know I've said to Methodist preachers now, they'll say things like, I plan to serve 20 more years and then retire. And I said, well, good, there may be a pension for you when you retire, but I've seen the numbers and they're not going to be into the distant future. We're in the Methodist pension. So, well, I'd like, though, of all the things that could be said about aging, to try to look at aging in my time with you from a Christian perspective. And that's what I tried to do in the book, is to use some of the research and literature on aging, but to look at it through the lens of Scripture as a Christian. And that's one thing we have as Christians to bring to this discussion that is different. First thing you notice, like as Christians who make sense of the world through Scripture, there ain't much about aging in Scripture. People, which tells you that Jesus' life was cut short, but he died on the cross at, we feel, about age 33. But age 36, 37 was considered old. Lifespan in the Roman Empire for the average person must have been around 40. So aging is something that you don't hear much about in the Bible. And when you do hear about it, it is clear, like in the Old Testament, aging was considered to be a blessing from God, because most people didn't live very long. And white hair, aging is spoken of in Scripture in a couple of places as a sign of a life well lived. You've lived as long, you've lived longer than most people, that must be a blessing from God. Although those of you who know the Old Testament know that you got books like Ecclesiastes that speak of, I remember that passage from Ecclesiastes. It was used in my church at the high school baccalaureate service. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And the preacher preached on that. Young people, as you graduate from high school, remember your Creator. It's a good time while you're young, remember God, and etc. Well, I got to college and took a course in Old Testament, and I had to read Ecclesiastes, and it says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come. When the silver cord of life is broken, and the bowl that holds your life is cracked and crushed, before the grinders cease, before your teeth fall out, before the windows are shut, your eyes, you're blinded. Remember in the days of your youth, because when you get older, you're going to despise God. And you're not wanting to do with God because God will break you down in your own day. Not the go-to picture of aging. And yet, maybe when you compare that with a lot of the retirements communities' advertisements, at least give the scripture credit for being honest that old age is a challenge, and a particular challenge with health issues. The main challenge, Ecclesiastes has right, I think, the main challenge of aging is death. That aging is an ever-present reminder that we are terminal, that our lives do not go on forever, that we are not eternal, that these bodies we inhabit have their limits, and to age is to be constantly reminded of those limits. It's been said that women in our society generally regard aging as a matter of a change in appearance, diminution of appearance, whereas men experience aging in our culture as a diminution of power, of influence, of the ability to achieve and do certain things. I'm sure that's probably changing and those generalities don't hold, but nevertheless, I remember a divinity school student telling me that he was complaining about the church he was serving as student pastor. And I said, well, tell me about your church. He said, well, we're a old church out in Washington County, and it's just mostly old people. And I said, well, it is a Methodist church, and that's kind of all we do now. But he said, well, old people are. And I said, well, how are old people? He said, stuck in their ways. They don't want anything to change. They get upset when you make the smallest change in the order of worship on Sunday morning, and it's just so frustrating. Well, as Providence would have it, I had just read an article on aging, which said that of the 5 or 6 worst things that happen to you in the course of your life, 3 or 4 of them happen after age 65. The loss of a spouse, the loss of a job, the loss of mobility, the loss of freedom, the loss of choice about, etc. So I said to the student, maybe the problem is that older adults are not stuck in their ways and won't change. Maybe the problem is they're going through the most radical changes that life ever throws our way. And so the last thing they want is to show up at church on Sunday morning and some smart young preacher say, hey, let's try something new. Because there's somebody on the front row that says, you bury a man that you have lived with for 35 years. That's all the innovation I can take this week, okay? I got enough innovation in my life as it is. So to talk about aging is therefore, telling the truth about aging is to confront a lot of the myths about aging. And in the book, I talk about myths such as you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that old people are incapable of learning new things. Many of you in the room, I bet, can say, gosh, in the last couple of years, I've had to learn a lot of new things, like leave a house that I was happy living in for 40 years, or I've had to learn to walk with a cane, or I've had to learn to live my life single for the first time in a long time, or I've had to completely modify my day to care or a loved one who is requiring constant care, or I've had to allow myself to be cared for and to be dependent on other people for my life. So studies show older adults, it is not true that all older adults are destined to suffer from dementia and memory loss. A portion of us do, but it is something like 18%, which is a significant number. But studies are also showing your expectations for, it's a new book by a professor at Yale, a doctor at Yale. And she says that her research indicates that your expectations for aging become kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. If you say to yourself, for instance, I remember one thing she had. She said, she meets with someone in this research thing and says, you're 65, aren't you? Well, I studies show that people over 65 have difficulty remembering things. And so I'm going to give you some things to remember, and let's see how well you remember this, okay? And she does. The people who are told this always score very low on memory. She thinks we're the same. I said, you're 65. Our studies show that people over 65 do not have trouble remembering things, and that their memory is quite as good. Sometimes it's a little slower to click in, but they remember. So I'm going to give you some things, and you take any time you need to remember, but let's see what you remember. They score like 70% higher than those told that older adults can't remember. And she has numerous studies, scientific, medical studies, showing that your attitude about aging makes a difference. I was just talking with a friend this morning who called me. He was sort of my management coach when I was bishop, retired business person. And I said, I'm going to talk about aging. And he said, well, how about telling them it's great? It turns out work is not always cut out to be. And he said, I've loved it. Yesterday, I was in a conversation with an administrator at the Divinity School. And he said, well, here's what we're going to do in the situation. And I hope we can count on you to think this was a good path to take, because we think it's doing what you want to do and all. And I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, let's see, next week is my 77th birthday. I'm only going to be teaching at the Divinity School another year or two. So I said to this dean, okay, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. Absolutely not what I think is a good idea. And I know you don't care what I say. We're still because I do. And but and I thought, I'm probably going to talk that way to a dean at 30. I'm past the age of discretion. A few weeks ago, I read, if you want to hear the truth told by somebody, ask the question of someone who is serving life sentence in prison, or who is 8 years old. There's a chance you may get the truth. So it is, to tell the truth means to speak of the predictable challenges of aging, along with the blessing of aging it is. Most of us, at least our grandparents, would probably not have dreamed of having the aging years that we're having. That would have been beyond their conception. And it has many privileges. And I had a couple of days where I had 3 youngish, now middle-aged, I guess, men who were all former students of mine calling me. And they were calling me about jobs that they think they want and that they would like to apply for. And they're calling me, would you write a letter and this kind of thing. And I got off the phone with the third one. After the third conversation, I told Patsy, I am so glad I am not 45 anymore. I'm going nowhere except, to my funeral. I said, there was a day when I was consumed with these matters of what's next, and should I apply for that, and is this a good idea? Should I stay? Should I go? I said, I haven't thought any. I don't have to think any of those thoughts anymore. This is it. And Scripture is the few places it talks about aging. For instance, the Gospel of Luke. And I noted the book, how does the Gospel of Luke begin? It begins with old people. Elizabeth, Zachariah, and Simeon, and Hannah. And these old people are depicted as, hanging out at the temple, because, old people have a lot of time to go to pottery classes at the church, and so they're at the temple. And so Mary, young Mary, is pregnant and all. Well, these old people are the first people in Luke's gospel to interpret this child, and will be the cause of the rising and the fall of many in Israel. This child will be a light to others. And so these older people are depicted as prophets. In fact, Anna is said to be the first prophet in the New Testament. And under the influence of the Holy Spirit, she foretells the future. And that's interesting that maybe older people do have wisdom that can be shared from their experience. Sometimes maybe older people, because over the course of their lives, they have had more reasons to connect with God in deep and honest, revealing ways. Maybe they have revelation to share with younger people. But as I noted in the book, it's interesting. We hear from Simeon and Anna. We hear from Elizabeth and Zachariah. It's the first of the Gospel of Luke. And then we never hear from them again. They make a statement of who this child Jesus will be, and then they leave. Which I think maybe is a model for those of us is we older people, if we're asked for our advice or opinion, which we love to be asked for our advice or opinion, but are not asked as much as we should be. But we should give it, and then we should depart. And I'm sure that had a couple of professor colleagues back of the room here. They can tell you that I do such a good job at faculty meetings. I sit there, I just sit there and smile, and the faculty will decide and do things, and I sit there and think, oh, the kids are running the school. Hey, we tried that. I was here when we tried it in 1982. It was a dumb idea then, it's a dumb idea. I sit there and smile, and people say, well, how do you think we're doing? It's just wonderful. I don't it's just wonderful. Get back in my life, and I say, yes. So anyway, but they can tell you I do a wonderful job of that. Not often. And the other day at faculty meeting, the dean said, yes, I think, we had a curriculum like that. I believe back in the 80s, and he said, well, did we do that back in the 80s, or was that 70s? And I said, what the hell are you asking me? Finally, inside. But then he said, okay, that's the last time I'll ever ask you anything. Well, so I do think, though, the Christian faith, some things I think about, says about aging is, one is God has created us to be terminal. We are wonderful people, but we are not angels. We are not gods. Little gods, we're human, we're animals. Right at the first, in Genesis, right at the first of creation, it says, okay, they're made from dirt and they're going to go back to dirt. And I used to always love that at New Chapel on Ash Wednesday. The president then, the only time she ever came to church was on Ash Wednesday. Father was a Presbyterian minister. I thought that said something about Presbyterians. That was always one of my biggest challenges, was standing there before my boss, the person who hired me, and said, you're dirt, and you're returning the dirt. I may get to dirt before you get there, but nevertheless, but I didn't say this. God does say that, but she would return every year next Wednesday, and I would keep. But I thought, I wonder if maybe one reason you come to church is the church is maybe one of the few places you're engaged in that tells the truth. You're a wonderful person. You've achieved a lot in life, but you're terminal. And one day your life shall end. That's a fact. Now, deal with it in a culture that has a lot of trouble dealing with that fact. That's the way God set it up. It's not an injustice that you're not eternal. That's the way God set it up. And the church, I think, at its better moments says that. Some of y'all may remember Ken Nelson was the first African-American assistant dean of the chapel. And we were sitting in a memorial service there, and memorial service to do chapel usually have 2 or 3 people speak. And this professor died, and someone was up there speaking and said, "This man's contributions to molecular chemistry will live forever." Just the other day, I saw an important monograph that he wrote in 1968, quoted, cited in an article. That's the kind of eternal contributions that he has made. And Ken leaned over to me, we're sitting up there, and he says, "Yeah, unfortunately, he's dead now." And I said, "Ken, no, they don't want to hear that." To be a Christian means to be told that, to know that. And maybe you're busy dealing with that terminology. But also, to be a Christian is to believe that you are created for a purpose, that you are created for relationship. Right again at the first, we're not only told we're dirt, but we're said, it is said in Genesis, it's not good to be alone. We are to connect, be fruitful, multiply in relationship. And one of the most interesting aspects of the studies of aging that I found today is we're learning how important socialization is, interaction. I got a friend talked to him yesterday, 92 years old. He's finally gone into a retirement center. And I said, "How did you finally decide to leave?" His wife, dear friend of ours, died about 8 years ago. And he said, "I was leaving my doctor, and my doctor said, Sinclair, you're looking really good. All the indications, everything is fine." But he said, "Sinclair, I don't have any medicine that cures isolation. I am concerned about your loneliness. You need to get out of that house, and you need to get with some other people." And Ina was telling me just this morning about the community she lives in, Chapel Hill. They have a community gathering once a week where for an hour, everybody just gathers and they talk and share things and all. And the research is kind of amazing. For instance, they're finding among people over 65, solitariness and isolation is as detrimental to your health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day is detrimental to your health. That's just kind of astounding. Betsy was quoting the other day a study she saw about issues of depression among older people. And that's a big issue. The suicide rate, for instance, with men, the highest time of suicide rate for men is from the late teens through the mid-20s. And then it drops until over 65. And then the suicide rate goes up. And anyway, she was reading and it was saying the importance of taking a walk outside in nature for people over 65. And they're not sure why, but they've documented very well it's important for us to get out and be walking in the street with the birds. And so but it's a way as Christians we could say, well, yeah, maybe God created us that way. That's the way we've been hardwired. And I am concerned that in our culture, we maybe have practices of aging that are detrimental, and that from not only a physical, emotional aspect, but also from a spiritual Christian aspect. One other thing is I think Christians are created for is purpose. We are created by God. We are called vocation. The life we're living is not our own. We actually believe we have been assigned responsibility. Therefore, I think it's kind of sick that many times have an image of aging is the best kind of aging is where you have no responsibility. I go to visit people in retirement centers and they say, it's just wonderful here. I don't have to prepare any meals. Don't have to worry about washing. I don't have to worry about cleaning. I don't have a single care in the world. Because, having a care in the world is called caring. It's called living. And I stated in the book, I was asked to have a prayer at the Duke University Retirees Association. Not even sure if there is one anymore, but they met, had a monthly luncheon and all, and I went and had the prayer. And the speaker, the featured speaker, the reason everybody was there was Coach Krzyzewski was the speaker. And he started out his speech, it sounded like a coach, and he said, I look around this room, I see wisdom. I see people who was top in their field, the best at plumbing, nuclear physics, housekeeping, electrical work, English literature, just the top of their field. People, the contributions, the lives that you have touched during your careers at Duke, it's just inspiring. He paused for effect and he said, now you owe us something. And he said, you raised your families in Durham. You benefited from all of the support and the social structures and everything. Many times you didn't have time or the resources to pay back. Whatever you do. And he said, I'll tell you what's sick. What's sick is sit on your butt, worried about your golf tee all the time is the biggest thing. I play golf, all right? But I'm telling you, it's enough for life. And they're nothing family. It's on that top, people. And small coach, you've got 10 young men on this team. Only two of them ever met their fathers. People, we need you. We got people in the front room, nobody raised kids. Well, we got to do he said, I got everything on the and I will keep that in thing. And you're going to give back to the town that gives so much to you. Well, and I thought that's a kind of a peculiarly Christian view of aging, which says, hey, people, irresponsibility, worrying about nobody but yourself, maybe members of your immediate family. The Gentiles do that. That's natural. That's normal. What's not normal is to take responsibility for somebody else's children, to worry about somebody else's aches and pains, to not simply say, I love my doctor and it's just great, but to think about all those people that don't have those resources to worry about with a doctor. I think we have been created for responsibility, to connect. We have been created to take responsibility for somebody else's family, and I worry that sometimes images of aging require us to be even more narcissistic and self-consumed than we already are as Americans. And maybe church is one place we come and we're made to look at a broader perspective, that that God is, and by the way, George Valiant, psychiatrist at Dartmouth, wrote a wonderful book on aging from the Harvard Grant study that has studied the Harvard class in 1946 every year, when they're now in their 90s, and it said that, for instance, I noted one of the most important factors for successful aging in men is contributing to the growth of younger people. And I realized, I mentioned earlier about my proteges checking in with me, wanting me to write a letter of recommendation. I get a lot of that. I love that. I'm still in the game, so to speak. Patsy and I know how much we enjoy living in the neighborhood we live in, because we look out the window, we're having breakfast in the morning, and there are children walking to school and young people, and that's important. We're around people who are got a future larger than ours and all. And Patsy has a relationship with a young woman in our neighborhood who's the spouse of a pastor of a church here in town, and has enjoyed getting to know her and having coffee with her and talking about the challenges of raising young children and all. Although just before Christmas, she showed up on our doorstep and she said, "Oh, I got a problem, and we got company coming last minute. I'm trying to make this dessert, and I need Patsy's help." And I said, "Oh, making the dessert?" And she said, "No, and I need 2 cups of bourbon." And I said, "Oh, okay, this is either very good or very sad. I said, that's not my biggest concern. You thought of her. Oh, okay. So, but we realized how much we enjoy that. And in fact, Sunday morning, I think some of you can testify. I do chapel. You love it when you come and there are younger people sitting next to you. So Daniel Corpening family, as we were coming there, and it's interesting me how much Patsy is thrilled to have the Corpenings sitting behind us in the chapel, and just loves it when the youngest, their little boy, we can hear him in the background says, "Okay, I've had it. Can we go out now?" Sit there. And Patsy would turn around and says, "Child is smart. I don't know how he feels." So let me stop there. And I'm just curious what this may have touched off in your own thinking, ruminations. You're Christians, you're aging, as we all, and so and if you haven't read the book, be glad any feedback on any of that. So.
Just something that came to my mind. I'm an Anglophile and watched the whole coronation.
Yeah.
I thought, here's this 74-year-old guy having a little trouble with all this regalia.
Yeah.
And his son gives him a kiss on the cheek and he says, "Thank you, William." It was kind of human to see all this around this old man, whatever else it was worth or not worth.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. We watched it too. And I was thinking also just the tradition, the love of these weird rituals from the past that have to be, nobody knows what they mean, and they explain to you and continuing, but it is. And I feel like I grew up with Charles because my weekly reader, they used to give us each week in elementary school, always had an article on Prince Charles. Prince Charles is now 7. Well, I was 7 too. And Prince Charles was gone for his first horseback ride. And so it was, and I remember the coronation of his mother, 1952, 53, because that's when we bought our first television set, so we could see the coronation. And so it was kind of like, here's my family too. And I have members of my family that are just as difficult as members of his family. So I'll do recognition with you. Yeah. There are mornings I get out of bed, though, and I say to Patsy, you know, I'm probably too old to be president of the United States. I'm not feeling like I need to run the country today. I hope Joe's feeling better than I'm feeling. I was back at a college board meeting of my college, and a young man came up. I said, "What do you think after graduation?" He said, "I'm working in Nikki Haley's campaign." And I said, "Really?" Okay. Well, how about telling Nikki that I speak for all older men in America. We can't stand her. There are some nice older men. And I said, you know, and what do you know about them? God will always jump anyway. So and again, I used to notice. I would often ask Duke students who came to the chapel. I'd take them to lunch and say, "Why do you come to the chapel?" And a lot of them said that they came to the chapel for the very reasons that some students don't come to the chapel, and therefore it's old. It looks older than it really is. It sings music written by your great grandparents, and one of the things people need is roots and tradition. I noticed at Duke, I remember Margaret Mead told us back in the 60s when I was a student, you're going to get along better with your grandparents than your parents, okay? Because your grandparents have seen more change and have made more innovation than your parents have. And so they can relate to you who want to change the world. Well, I noted how many Duke students were close to their grandparents. And when I was pastor of a Methodist church here in town a few years ago, I remember a young woman showing up, and I said, "Well, what has brought you?" She said she was interested in joining our church. And I said, "Wonderful." And I said, what is it that you like about our church? And she said, "Gray hair." And I said, "Wow, my gray hair?" Said, "No, it's gray hair." And she said, "I miss my grandmother so much. And I am stuck in these apartments across the street with everybody's my age. That means everybody's as dumb about life as I am. And I need some gray hair." Well, I said, wow, it's almost like God is giving us a mission just to be somebody who's made it to 65. So, Carol.
So what are some things you think the church has done well in regards to aging, and where can we?
Carol, you know me, Jeremy, I don't focus on the positive. Carol, it's been rich for you, but I want you to focus on something that's going right. Well, you know, again, I think the church, just in its own bumbling way, teaches me about my finitude, my mortality. It tells me the truth the world will not tell me, the world lies about. And also the church brings me in contact with people that I'm not related to. I remember the great theologian Eddie Murphy saying, "I'm sick and tired of people talking about my family." And Murphy said, "That's your job." It's all remarkable that we all gather in this church and give money to people we don't even know, people that maybe our country is at war with. That's just kind of, that's not happening all over town. So I think that's good. I think too, one thing that older people need is intellectual stimulation, thinking. We had a sermon a few weeks ago, and somebody, I don't know if it's in this room or not, but a person my age came to me and said, "What? I don't think that sermon was being preached all over town. You probably had to come here to hear that. Wasn't that great?" And I thought, that is great. And maybe one of the reasons you come is for that kind of stimulation. Patsy would say one thing the church does well is beauty. And there's a lot of ugliness, I mean, you wake up this morning and you hear there's been another mass shooting in Texas, and the Republicans in Texas are not going to do a darn thing about it, so nothing will be done about it. That's pretty ugly. Well, you get to come to Duke Chapel, and in the midst of all that tragedy and all, there'll be some beauty. And just that is, I think, a gift. I think maybe we could do better. I say in the book, I think we could do a better job of supporting caregivers of the elderly. I have friends whose lives have been totally changed. It's friends, as she said to me, I am more tied down and more exhausted and more limited now at age 70 than I was when I was a young mother with two infant children, because I'm now caring for my husband. What could churches do to help relieve some of that burden? And I tell about a church I ran across where they've got volunteers who say to caregivers, we will give you 3 hours a week of your choosing where you can leave the house and go do what you want to do. Go to your club meeting, go do whatever you want to do. You will do that. Somebody will come and you can train them, and you can leave without a worry for free. So we could do more that way. I do think maybe we could continue to enjoy telling the truth about aging, that aging can be it can be hell for people who don't have the financial resources to handle aging, for people that are alone, people who don't have family networks to support them. The church could step up. And by the way, I remember someone in Duke Chapel who every week showed up for a woman that she sang in the choir with at Duke Chapel and would do her washing. And she would also show up at the retirement center she lived in, and she became her advocate with the staff about she's not being cared for the way we think. And this woman had no family in town, had a daughter nearby, relatively nearby. The daughter was unable to visit her mother because the daughter could not handle seeing her mother in this situation, is what she said. Anyway, I thought that was just amazing. She wasn't related to them or anything, but they had met in church. And I think we could probably do better of cultivating that. One of my proudest moments of ministry was we had a mother and daughter who had war with one another. That's not that unusual, but they'd come to me and we'd talked, and I'd said, it's 16-year-olds can be tough and all. And said, no, that's pretty tough. And one of the big problems was the teenager insisted on playing music so loud, hard rock music, and was belligerent and all. Well, that afternoon, I was visiting a retired Duke professor who attended the chapel when she could. And she was in crisis because her children had said, you're deaf, you've got to move, you cannot live alone anymore, you've got to move out. And she said, I can't do that. I just can't face that and all. Anyway, I think this was the Holy Spirit. It worked. Them together. And the teenager moved in with the professor. And it was wonderful because the professor would say, I'm going to turn my hearing aids off and play whatever you want to play. It's me. And as soon as I get up and book at the chapel, I would look out and see those three sitting together and think, wow, that's church. That's kind of as church ever gets. And so I bet you we could do more with that. And Patsy enrolled me in a study. Some psychiatrists and doctors were doing at Duke for type A personality. I don't know why they thought of me, who had no previous physical exercise program, and it was research and all. But we would not only have the humiliation of having to exercise and be on these cycles and all, but we would get lectures while we were working. Thanksgiving is a very hard time for people because you're going to be tempted by people you love to overeat and consume high cholesterol food that can be detrimental to you and all. And I know at one moment I said to our trainer, I said, look, I'm clergy. And I know, can I have the microphone just for a few minutes and say, hello, I'm clergy, and I don't give a rip if you eat yogurt and beluga, I don't give a rip if you're on the cycle for you. And see me afterwards. So I do think the church at its best helps me think about that which is kind of painful to think about. Yes, Craig.
I've enjoyed retirement greatly. I love being in my study surrounded by books, a lot of them by Will Willimon, and I've actually read them. But I have a very close friend. He's should be by now retired professor at Carolina, but he's not retired. His wife wants him to retire. We want him to retire. He's a marine chemist, and he said to me when he was in my study once, your study is not my scene. My scene's a lab. And I've got, for me to do what you do, I have to have a lab. And the lab, I don't have access to it unless I'm working, teaching. Well, last year, he also has to do a lot of diving. And last year, they get a test every year, diving, he failed. He can't do those kinds of things anymore. He's desperately holding on to the job so he can do research while I'm just enjoying my study. And wow, Will, should we try to get him to retire?
You know, that is a central issue. Just quickly, I'll say in the book, I think I'm opposed to mandatory retirement ages. I think mandatory retirement ages mainly protect administrators from having to make difficult decisions about us. However, there are good reasons to retire. And when I came back to Duke after my sojourn in Alabama, I was in the Duke Hospital visiting patients. And 3 Duke doctors whom I'd known in my previous time here came up to me and said, have you heard? I'm being kicked out. I'm being thrown out. And said, I think I'm at my prime. I think I know more than a young doctor knows. And yet, well, Duke evidently negotiated this, some of y'all know about this than I do, but, and they said, okay, rather than say mandatory age retirement out, we're saying 70, there will be an examination of you and your work and conversations, and we will see, does it make sense for you to continue or not? Or to continue to do certain, like for instance, working in a lab, why not? Going deep sea diving, maybe not. So I'm for looking at situations and here, again, I got colleagues in the room who are thinking, wow, I wish he could listen to this and like leave. It's time for him to retire. You know what I've said to my dean, look, promise me, I said, I'm willing to keep working for another year or two. As long as you promise me, you'll come to me and say to me, you're embarrassing yourself and the school, you need to retire, okay? Or you'll find a nice way to say that. Or I promise you, when I'm diagnosed with a serious illness, I will immediately leave. I won't hang on at all because I have seen clergy try to do this and damage churches and all. So I just think we need to negotiate. The fastest growing cohort of adults in America now are people over 90. We are living longer, we're working longer. What did you tell me today? You're retiring next week. I hope you feel good about that. And I think there's so many good reasons to feel good about retirement. But I just think that's got to be negotiated and seen. And the fact, but maybe it also says to me, I need to craft a life in such a way that I'm able to retire, that I have interest beyond simply my job. And Chris, for instance, is a professor, an intellectual. From what I've observed, professors, if they want to, can do retirement pretty well because you can continue to read and reflect and all. However, they're challenged. Again, I think it'd be great for churches to do like pre-retirement discussions, to share with one another the challenges of retirement, to learn from one another best practices in retirement. And so, well, thank y'all for being with me.
Thanks, everyone. Next week, we will not have adult forum due to graduation. We will meet again the week after that. I hated to be the guy who come up and tell Will, okay, your time is up.
Yeah.
But somebody had to do it.
But maybe telling the truth.
Yeah.
That's right.